The Crimson Dawn, a tale of Sultan Jelal. Prologue, the weight of a name. Prince Jelal ibn Jin al-Quraysh al-Transoxiani, heir to the Heping Sultanate, stared at his reflection in the polished obsidian of his suite in New Hanyang. The familiar crimson flush crept up his neck, the legacy of last night's wine. Empty bottles glittered like fallen stars. The reflection showed privilege, lineage, and profound emptiness. Outside, the Sultanate stretched, a legacy of justice he felt utterly unworthy to inherit. Chapter 1, The Gilded Cage and the Crimson Stain. From childhood, Prince Jelal ibn Jin al-Quraysh al-Transoxiani had been raised with the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. The halls of the Phoenix Palace in New Hanyang were adorned with holo portraits of righteous ancestors, sultans who built cities from the dust, who memorized the Quran, who rode into battle with La ilaha illallah on their lips. At the center of it all was the boy who would be heir. His father, Sultan Jin, was both distant and immense in his presence. A former general turned sovereign, his silences were often more formative than his lectures. Jelal would sit at his feet while the Sultan received emissaries, absorbing the languages of diplomacy, the calculated calm of power. But when the meetings ended, so did the warmth. Affection, in the palace, was a rare commodity. Jalal's mother, Sultana Layla of the House of Minute, was gentler but no less burdened. A scholar of medicine and Islamic jurisprudence, she filled Jalal's childhood with books, tutors, and whispered supplications in the dark hours before dawn. She taught him the duas of the prophets, the meanings behind the surahs, and the necessity of humility. But even she could not shield him from the crushing expectations. His Hanbali tutors were unrelenting. One mistake in Tajweed or Arabic grammar meant standing for hours in the study hall. Jalal's schedule was militarized, hours of Quran, hadith memorization, poetry in Persian and Chinese, calligraphy, economics, and martial training. He grew fluent in 8 languages, but often stammered when asked simple questions by his father. Despite the structure, Jelal craved affection, something not in the curriculum. By age 17, he had become a master of ritual, but not of self. Then came the courtiers, the elite children of viziers and governors, who taught him the unspoken language of palace politics, subtle mockery, charm, indulgence. It was with them that Jelal learned to sneak contraband synth wine into the dormitories, to mask his fear of failure with laughter, to blur his sharp loneliness with pleasure. By his 20th year, Jelal had become a contradiction, brilliant but lost, eloquent but hollow, reverent in public yet adrift in private. Samarkand's pleasure domes became his refuge. He moved through their neon-lit corridors like a shadow. Laughter echoed around him, but it could not reach inside. The wine flowed not from joy, but from a desire to silence the internal drumbeat. You are unworthy. You are a fraud. The infamous banquet came during a diplomatic gala with delegates from the Occidental hegemony and the Caliphate of Sunda. Jelal, spectacularly drunk, staggered into the ceremonial sword of liberation, an heirloom said to have belonged to one of the rightly guided caliphs. The stumble, caught on every news feed, became instant scandal. For the first time, the mask cracked. The Malaysian flush he so often mocked became symbolic. It wasn't just alcohol. It was shame, guilt, weakness, made visible. The following day, his father did not speak to him. His mother wept silently during Tahajjud prayers. A senior general, a war hero of the Mars border campaigns, looked Jelal in the eyes and said, simply, "We bled for this sultanate. What have you done but drink it away?" Chapter 2, Flight into the Unknown. That night, Jelal stood on the edge of the palace's upper terrace, watching the call to prayer rise over New Hanyang. His father's city glowed beneath him, immaculate, orderly, pious. And yet he felt like a trespasser in it. He packed lightly, coarse traveler's wool, a water skin, and the Quran his mother had given him as a child, still mostly unread. He left his unit on his desk, glowing softly with unread messages. He ignored the biometric doors, scaling the outer terrace with the dexterity taught in his youth. For once, palace guards turned the other way. At the solar sail barge docks outside the city, he boarded a westbound vessel under the name Yusuf. No family name. No title. Just a man among laborious, drifters, and pilgrims. No one recognized him. Or if they did, they said nothing. He did not know where he was going. That was the point. The days aboard the solar barge were slow, sun-scorched. He shared dates and bread with strangers. Children asked him if he was a soldier, seeing the scar on his arm from a training match. He said no, just a traveler. At night, he stared at the stars, wondering if Allah would ever listen to someone like him. And still, he couldn't bring himself to open the Quran. Chapter 3, Dust, Stone, and the Whispering Pages. The sky above Old Merv was not a sky, but a parchment smeared in ash and rose, torn open by the desert wind. And into this ancient city, neither dead nor alive, came Yusuf, once Prince Jelal of the Heping Sultanate, now a nameless shadow cloaked in the dust of exile. The solar barge departed with a low groan, leaving behind the scent of metal and departure. He stepped off alone, the sand swallowing the echo of his boots. The walls of Merv were cracked like old scriptures, and its gates stood half open like the lips of a forgotten spell. Labors moved like ghosts through the ruins. Not one asked his name. Their eyes, hollow from sun and silence, welcomed none and judged none. It was a city of penance. He traded his palace silks for the robe of toil. The callus on his hands grew thick as bark. Each morning, before the call of the crows, he hauled stone through the skeletal bones of the city's rebirth, mosques being raised upon the ruins of fire, irrigation trenches clawed from the stubborn earth. His spine ached with unfamiliar honesty. No title shielded him here. No luxury dulled the edge of reflection. In the evenings, fires were lit in the Khan's common room. There, exiles from fallen emirates and widows of a dozen wars passed stories like bread. Jelal listened, silent. To speak was to remember, and he had fled his name like a criminal from justice. One night, when the desert wind wet through the latticework of his bunk, he found the Quran at the bottom of his satchel. His fingers trembled upon its binding. He opened it. At first, the words danced cruelly, as if mocking his forgotten fluency. But slowly, the verses began to settle, like sand after a storm. And the servants of the Most Merciful are those who walk upon the earth in humility. The words struck not his ears, but his marrow. They did not forgive, but they called. That night, beneath a cracked dome open to the stars, Jelal performed wuju with water drawn from a shared cistern. The sting of it on his hands felt like fire and frost together. He stood at the back of the mosque, the scent of sun-baked stone in his lungs, and raised his hands in prayer. The verses faltered on his tongue, rusty and raw. But still, he did not stop. Chapter 4, Light Between Shadows. Months turned to years. Jalal's presence in Old Merv grew steady like the desert's patient pulse. He learned to see the cracks not as wounds but as openings for light. The corruption scandal that had swallowed Old Merv's prosperity unfolded before him like a tangled web of greed and silence. A small group of officials had siphoned aid meant for irrigation and rebuilding, pocketing wealth while the city languished in drought and dust. Jelal began collecting evidence quietly, risking suspicion from those who saw his labor as nothing more than exile. His nights were spent poring over ledgers, intercepting letters, and listening to whispered rumors in taverns and prayer halls. He found unlikely allies among the displaced clerks, soldiers, and merchants, each eager to see justice. Together, they crafted a plan, patient and precise. The people of Old Merv began to stir. Hope, fragile but persistent, glimmered in the eyes of those who had long given up. Jalal's prayers deepened. Faith was no longer just words, it was action, a light threading through the dark. He wrote letters, sending them secretly to trusted contacts far beyond the desert, to those who could hold the corrupt accountable. His resolve hardened. The boy who once fled now sought to rebuild, not just cities, but honor. Chapter 5, Return of the Crimson Dawn. The winds of change swept through the Sultanate. Jalal's evidence ignited a storm. Public tribunals aired live, exposing ministers who had betrayed the trust of the people. The palace walls trembled not from siege, but from justice. Jelal returned to New Hanyan, no longer a prince hiding in shadows, but a leader reborn. His voice, tempered by exile and faith, called for mercy and reform. The Sultanate watched as the crimson dawn rose, not just in the sky at dawn, but in the hearts of a land ready to heal. A council was established, representatives from all walks of life tasked with overseeing transparency and rooting out corruption. Jalal's father, now older and quieter, finally met his son's eyes with a mixture of pride and sorrow. No words were needed. The legacy was no longer a burden, it was a promise. Epilogue, Silent Threads. Far from the Sultanate, in a quiet room thick with books and shadows, a woman sat by a dim lamp. Her fingers traced the edges of letters and images, proof of crimes committed, whispers of injustice stretching across continents. She moved carefully, contacting distant allies, gathering fragments of truth. Her purpose was hidden, her identity unknown. But the wheels of reckoning were already turning, set in motion by threads only she could weave. The story was far from over.